Good evening, everyone. Like all good Toastmasters, we would like to start on time. My name is Joe Ido, your program quality director and host for tonight's What is Executive Presence Elective? This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our District 56 YouTube channel. First, let's go over a few rules and protocols. We would love for this to be an interactive session. Feel free to leave your video on, but please mute your mic until you're ready to talk. Let's keep in mind those Toastmaster core values: integrity, respect, service, and excellence through the entire meeting. Without further ado, let's introduce your instructor, Becky Noe. Woohoo! Becky!
Hello, guys. How are you doing this evening?
Becky works as a financial internal control director for a Fortune 500 organization headquartered right here in Houston. In this role, she often presents vital information to all levels of management, including C-suite members. Becky holds a joint bachelor's and master's in accountancy from the University of Oklahoma. She is a doctorate candidate with Grand Canyon University. Becky is a certified public accountant and a certified internal auditor. That means keep her on your good side. In 2018, Becky became a DTM. She is the immediate past finance manager for District 56. Please help me welcome soon-to-be Dr. Noe, distinguished Toastmaster, Becky Noe.
Yeah! Woohoo!
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everybody. I am going to share my screen and we can begin.
My broker says it's a real good buy. What does your broker say? Well, my broker's E.F. Hutton. And Hutton says, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
This vintage commercial exemplifies one of the characteristics of executive presence. I want to begin today by asking you a couple of questions. When you enter a room, are people aware that you've entered the room? Have you earned a seat at the executive table? If you're seated at the executive table, do you speak? And if you speak, do people listen to you, much like this vintage commercial? If you've answered yes to any one of those questions, you are exhibiting characteristics of executive presence. But if you answered no to any one of those questions, hope is not lost, because like other leadership qualities and characteristics, executive presence can be learned, studied, and developed. Today, we're going to explore executive presence, and we're going to begin by identifying why does executive presence matter? We'll go through the characteristics of executive presence, and then we're going to do an evaluation. We're going to have yes or no questions that will help you determine where you stand on the executive presence spectrum. We'll end with some action items. And throughout the meeting, I'm going to give you clues as to why we're going to specifically have a question and answer period. Sound like a good plan? Now, like any characteristic, any generalization that we make about executive presence, these are going to be generalizations. And for every example I give you, I personally can think of one or two executives that may not exhibit those traits. And this really irritated me. I began to look at that farther, and my research found that there are two paths to reach the C-suite. And determine, based off of which path you utilize to reach the C-suite, you may exhibit more characteristics of executive presence. For example, the gentleman on the right, Mr. Darren Woods, is the CEO of ExxonMobil, and John Stankey is the CEO of AT&T. Both are Texas-based organizations, and both organizations have been around for a while. As such, neither Mr. Woods nor Mr. Stankey is the first CEO for these organizations. The other thing that sets Mr. Woods and Mr. Stankey apart from the gentleman on the right is that both Mr. Woods and Mr. Stankey, in their career development, grew in roles that had greater responsibility each time they received a promotion. And in doing so, they learned and had examples of executive presence to emulate and follow. I'm not making any discouraging statements against Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Kors. Both have had wonderfully successful careers. But the point I would like to make with these two gentlemen is that they are the CEOs of an organization that they founded. As such, they're in their very first role. And neither one of them, and in particular Mr. Zuckerberg, has had the role models that he could emulate. And that's evidence when you see some of his speeches. So keep in mind, when you think about the general generalizations that I'm making tonight, ask yourself or not, they follow the tradition. Have any of you seen someone whose career is on the fast track? The phrase we used to use is they have a rocket in their pocket. This person may not be the most technically savvy person, but they're doing something well. And if we haven't figured out what that is, then let me explain parts of that to you. The reason that they have a rocket in their pocket is they are exuding executive presence. Executive presence is a blend of qualities that transmit that you are in charge or you deserve to be in charge. Many people think that executive presence is about our interpretation, but actually it's about other people's interpretation of you and the work that you do. Executive presence is about your ability to first inspire others to listen to you and then to follow you. But why does executive presence matter after all? Well, Sylvia Ann Hewlett is a researcher in executive presence. And in the title of her book, she very clearly outlines why executive presence matters. Executive presence is, simply put, the missing link between merit and success. In interviewing CEOs, Ms. Hewlett found that executive presence is an intangible quality. And like beauty, we can identify why a person is beautiful, but we may not be able to place our finger on why they're beautiful at that particular moment in time. One CEO even went as far as to say, I can't tell you what makes up executive presence, but I know it when I see it. And I think that's where a lot of us fall, is when we see someone who's leading and leading well, and we start looking at what they're doing, we may not be able to pinpoint all of the things that they do well, but we know that we would follow them through fire or through water. When Ms. Hewlett went further to ask, what is it that the executives are looking at when they're evaluating us? 5% of the executives said that they are looking at how we appear. 28% of the executives said It's all about how this person communicates. Can they talk and grab my attention? And can they talk succinctly? But an overwhelming 68% said it is about how we appear. Do we possess gravitas or solemnness? But it's important to note that when we're thinking about how we look, how we talk, and how we act, these don't happen in a vacuum. In fact, as you're evaluating me speaking tonight, you're also looking at how am I acting and what's my appearance. So none of these characteristics happen in a vacuum, but let's go through each one of them and talk about the executive presence, starting with appearance. Now, if all things are equal, and the person whose work environment is A, and the person whose work environment is B, and they are both technically savvy, who is going to get the job? That's okay, you can say it.
B.
B. Why?
They're tidy.
They're tidy. And it looks like they're in control, yes? If all things are equal, B will get the promotion over A. Now, when we talk about appearance, it's easy to get into the mindset that it's all about our physical appearance. But in reality, it's about a lot of other things as they appear as well. When you turn in an email, do you have misspelled words? Is the comma in the wrong spot? Do you use executive summaries? I'm a big executive summary person. I bullet everything. One thing that absolutely makes me crack up is when I see a table in a presentation in which the numbers don't tie. How many of you went back to this pie to see if that tied to 100? Every accountant and every engineer in the room did. Yes? All of those tie into our appearance. And it's not just our physical appearance, but it's also our work product as well. If we're talking about executive presence and we're talking about physical appearance, what dress code immediately comes to mind for you? I often think of executive presence as someone wearing a suit and a tie.
Yep.
Or someone wearing a jacket, a blazer. But what if your dress code is business casual? Which one of the images best represents executive presence? And there may be more than one.
My eye is drawn to E
E, most definitely. And
and
why?
A. Well, E because she's got her self covered up. Unlike
Yeah.
D,
We're gonna get
who's
back
got
to that
everything
point, Pam.
exposed.
Yeah.
And then A, because again, he's not looking down. He
Mhm.
looks like he wants to
Right.
be there.
Okay.
I
How about
think
anybody
C.
else?
I think C.
I think
Yeah.
C. C. Okay, so we've had a couple of votes for C as well. Right, let's talk about A and why he got put on the screen. And yes, he looks comfortable and he looks like he feels like he belongs, which is important for executive presence. But he's dressed more for a casual Friday than a Monday through Thursday.
Yep. Agreed.
Agreed?
And he put his hands in the pocket.
Yes, he's got his hands in his pocket. And I don't know about you, but I noticed the wrinkles, and whether that's from his hands in his pocket, which is probably most likely, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But there's a couple of wrinkles that I see, correct?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what about when he unrolls his sleeves? There's going to be wrinkles there, yes?
Agreed.
Agreed. And what about his shirt? Is anyone concerned about his shirt being tucked in?
It looks like it's bloused out. It's not at his waist.
Yeah,
Yes.
Looks like, you know, the sagging pants that the
Yeah.
young men wear.
yeah,
Mhm. Yes. So he may, in physical appearance, look like he's very comfortable there.
mhm,
But I don't necessarily agree that he's exuding executive presence for the things that we listed.
mhm.
Now, I included B, and there's a reason why I included B. And just to let you know, there's two reasons why I don't think he exudes executive presence. But can anyone guess what the first reason is? It has
He
nothing to do with his physical appearance.
I see he put his hands on the head. Seems like he's really in trouble of figuring something
Thank
out.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Immediately, I'm thinking he's not an accountant in month-end close. He's got
Yeah.
a project with a deadline. And I don't know about you, but he just exuded a clear amount of stress for me.
Uh-huh, yeah,
I included him because of that. But let's move to C for a moment. And let me tell you why I included C. I worked with a gentleman, and between the two of us, we are always being called into C-suite meetings. And it may be at a drop of a hat. So I always need to be ready. This gentleman would wear, and he would always be ready too, but he would wear a business shirt with a stiffer collar, which is why I picked C,
uh-huh,
so that he could toss that jacket on or he could toss a tie on and be ready to go. And to me, C may not be 100% at executive presence right now, but he could be there in about 5 minutes,
yep, mhm,
right? Whereas B, I'm not so sure if that shirt's a soft polo shirt,
mhm,
but if it is, it's definitely not going to hold a tie, the knot of a tie very well, nor will it fit very well underneath a jacket.
mhm.
So I included B, one, because as we said, he looks stressed out, and immediately there's just waves of stress that's rolling off of him. But
Yep,
also that shirt isn't going to go very well for that executive C-suite meeting.
mhm.
Okay, now nobody mentioned D, and I really hesitated to put D onto the screen, but I got to tell you why I put D on the screen. As a manager, I often work with young professional women, and they have earned the right to sit at a meeting with leadership, discussing, in my job as an auditor, discussing audit observations. And they have brought up a very valid point, but nobody's heard them. And because it's valid, I repeat it. It needs to be discussed, it needs to be said. And we get a lot of discussion off of me having brought up the very point that that young woman professional brought up. We'll leave the meeting and she will turn to me and say, I said exactly the same thing you said. Nobody heard me. This is my opportunity as a manager, as a mentor, to have a hard conversation. And that conversation very simply is, if your skirts are too short or your blouses are too low, people may not realize why they're ignoring you. They will simply ignore you. And you may have earned the right to sit at the table, but you will not keep that chair at the table because nobody is listening to you.
Mhm.
And nobody is necessary. If you're not thinking about executive presence, you're not knowing why you're ignoring the lady in image D. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Agree.
So while I hesitated to bring her up, as leaders, we need to have those hard conversations. So C and E get my vote, and more E.
mhm,
Okay. When we're having hard conversations, that often happens during employee performance review. And managers will tell employees, you need to work on your communication style. You need to be able to communicate if you want to progress in the company. And what they're saying is you don't have the communication style most associated with executive presence. What they will recommend is that the employee join a professional speaking, take a professional speaking class, or join Toastmasters. And I have given that advice myself. That's wonderful advice. We should all be able to talk better. And that's what Toastmasters lets us do. But there's some important things we need to realize when we're in our Toastmaster classes, or when we're in our Toastmasters meetings, is that executives differ in how they communicate. They differ in what they say, and they differ in how they say it. When I was a young accountant, I had an epic fail. Capital E, capital F, epic fail. It was 2 days in front of Halloween, similar to what the time frame is here. And I was headed to a Halloween party. I was very excited about it. And even now, talking to you guys, I am rambling. But I was excited about this Halloween party. And I climbed onto the elevator, and right as the elevator door shut, the division VP came on the elevator with me. And he turned to me and he smiled and he said, "How is it going?" Well, he's never spoken to me before that moment. And so I blanched. I froze. I stopped breathing. I think that passed for a floor or two. We were on the 20th floor, and I came to my senses and I started talking to him. But I rambled inconsequentially for 20 floors about the Halloween party I was going to. Epic fail. I knew it was an epic fail when the elevator doors opened and the vice president bolted off the elevator. Now, to solidify how much of an epic fail this was, the next morning, my boss's boss came into my office. In the 5 years I had worked for the man, I only ever went into his office. He never made his way down to my office. Like I said, epic fail. And he turned to me and he said, "Becky, elevator speeches, learn them, use them." All right, what is an elevator speech and why is it appropriate when we're developing an executive communication style? An elevator speech is similar to our table topics, except there are a couple of key characteristics. Like our table topics, elevator speeches are meant to get a point across quickly. And elevator speeches typically happen in the ride of an elevator, hence their name. But elevator speeches are about a product, a service, or a project that you are working on. And they're meant for talking with executives or talking with salespeople. It's meant for a very, very quick introduction. Why are elevator speeches, or learning about elevator speeches, appropriate when you're developing an executive communication style? Well, Toastmasters lists 4 communication styles. Does anyone know what they are? Who's done module 2? It's initiating, supportive, analytical, and direct.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Out of those 4, which communication style do you think executives possess? Most of them possess.
Director.
Yes. Most of them possess a direct communication style. And for people that possess a direct communication style, they are goals-oriented, results-driven, and decisive. And they decide on very little information. The second reason why having elevator speeches in our back pocket is so important as we're developing this executive presence and the communication style that goes along with it is that executives sit in a lot of meetings. They have a lot of phone calls and they get tons of emails. Therefore, they get bombarded with information and reach information overload quickly. If you're trying to gather their attention, you have a very short window in which to gather their attention. Hence, the elevator speeches are perfect for that. Now, let's talk about the makeup of an elevator speech. And I want you to think back to grammar school, but we're going to put a couple of fine-tuned executive twists on that. How big is a paragraph? How many sentences should a paragraph have in it? What's the minimum amount of sentences a paragraph can have?
A
3.
minimum of 3.
1 minute.
Yes, a minimum of 3. And for an elevator speech, you're crafting a paragraph of between 3 to 5 sentences. No more than that. All right? What's the first sentence in your paragraph? The first sentence, what you want to do is craft your vision so that it will fit into your first sentence of your paragraph. You need to be able to articulate your vision so clearly it can fit in a sentence. Sentences 2, 3, and 4, the middle part of your paragraph, are in support of your topic sentence. They're providing additional information, maybe some statistics. And then the 5th sentence, you're wrapping everything up. But for an executive elevator speech, that 5th sentence needs to be a call to action. Because if you do not ask for more resources, you do not ask for a sponsor, then the executive assumes you have everything covered. But if you're looking for a sponsor, if you're looking for action from the executive, then that 5th sentence needs to be a call to arms. Now, one of the things that I do in my job is I write a lot of policy. And so my first sentence is, here is the policy. We're making the following changes. Those happen in sentences 2, 3, and 4. And then my 5th sentence is please review, approve, or get back to me with any comments you may have. Do you identify that call to action in that email that I just sent to you? Okay. I have to do a follow-up story on my epic fail. Despite having that epic fail, I must have been doing something right because I received a promotion and I was soon over all of the receptionists and the office administrators in the Denver office. But we had had some disastrous phone conversations with customers in which we transferred the phone to the wrong department, or we transferred the phone, we didn't draft the message correctly, but we were having some disastrous communications with our customers, and the receptionists and the office administrators were our first line of defense. So 3 months later, I'm on the elevator again, and I'm joined by the same division VP. Except this time, he turns to me and he says, with a smile, how is it going? And you and I both know that that smile was a test to see what I had learned about elevator speeches, yes? And I turned to him and I said, today was the first day of a telephone etiquette class attended by the receptionists and the office administrators that support them. One sentence. He asked me questions through the rest of the ride and emphasized to me how important he thought this class was. And when we landed on the lobby and the elevator's doors opened, the conversation continued for 5 more minutes because it was something he was very interested in. When I talk to you about the importance of elevator speeches in your executive presence, that can make or break the image that an executive has of you very quickly. When we're talking about developing our communication style as it relates to executive presence, and when we're drafting that elevator speech, there are 5 C's that I would like for you to keep in mind. What's the first C?
Clarity.
Clarity. What did I say about the topic sentence? What should we have? What should the topic sentence be?
Open with the vision.
It's your vision. Correct. You should be able to articulate your vision in a sentence. And when you are able to do that, you will be surprised at how clear that vision statement becomes. Second, you want that speech, that elevator pitch, to be very concise. And we also want it to be crisp. Now, I didn't see any members from Pathways of Professional Speaking on tonight. But one of the things that they do when they evaluate is they talk about the crispness of speech. And when Pops talks about that, what they're saying is that every word is articulated. And yes, that's important, but I'm talking about a different kind of crispness. When you're drafting your elevator speech, when we were in grammar school, we got told to pepper it with adverbs and adjectives and flowery language. Ignore that when you're making an elevator speech and when you're developing your executive presence communication style. When I refer to crispness, this is having the ability to say what you need to say in the shortest amount of words possible. Now, when I talk to a lot of people about an elevator speech, they're not comfortable with an elevator speech because, well, it's easier to ramble, let's face it. But the other thing is a lot of people will say, if I give you time to ask me a question, you're going to do just that. But if I ramble, you won't have time to ask me a question. Well, there's one more piece about a direct communication style, which is executives and those that possess a direct communication style typically ask questions. They're not interrupting you when they're asking you a question. They are trying to cut to the chase or the heart of the matter. But if they are asking you a question, it's also a compliment that they're interested in what you have to say. But we aren't comfortable with that compliment, and we aren't comfortable with that question. And so we ramble. But the question allows us to show our credibility in the subject matter. So when you're thinking about your elevator speech, think about the 5 more layers behind what would somebody ask me related to my elevator speech. And those questions are your way to establish your credibility in that subject. The last C is why we should have more than one elevator speech. And that is because we, as we're progressing in our careers, executives are looking to see if we can make a connection. And I've heard this said before, that someone couldn't be a good salesperson Because if they couldn't connect with an executive, they couldn't connect with the customer. So when they're looking at our ability to connect, they're looking at our ability to have these short conversations. And guess what? Elevator speeches don't have to only be done in an elevator. They can be done in a party and used as a networking approach. And the reason you want 5, or the reason you want at least 3 elevator speeches, is because the conversation that you have with the vice president of sales is probably not going to be the same conversation you have with the chief of human resources. Or at least I hope it's not. So have a couple of good elevator speeches in your pocket that you can dust off for any networking meeting. Any questions about elevator speeches? As Toastmasters, what do we commonly refer to these elevator speeches as? Oh, come on, guys. Table topics, right? When you're developing your table topics, think about your 5 C's, and that will help improve your communication style as it relates to executive presence. Okay, here's the one thing that I want Toastmasters to keep in mind. When we're talking and we're trying to develop an executive presence, there's a difference between how a professional speaker speaks and how an executive speaks. And there's slight differences that we need to keep in mind. How many of you have been coached to use the full stage? I've been coached that on several times. How many of you have been coached to use bigger, broader, more dramatic body language? Me too. And I've also been coached on using wider range of vocal variety. And all of these things are great as a professional speaker or as a Toastmaster. But executives, when they are talking, their body language is actually, if a professional speaker is stretched out, then an executive's body language has a narrower scope. And an executive will actually use body language closer to the vest and maybe not so much around the heads. They won't use height and depth. It'll be closer to the vest. Executives are not monotone, and many of the executives that you can see have had coaching, voice coaching, they become less monotone as they've had this training, but they're going to be more narrower of scope than a Toastmaster will be. The one thing that an executive will do and utilize is the pauses. And the executive will utilize a pause because there's wanting the investors to capture what they've said and to digest that. So if you're wanting to develop a more executive communication style, keep your body language a little closer to your vest, but use more dramatic pauses. And once again, just as with Toastmasters, we want to minimize those filler words because the filler words detract from the message that we're presenting. When executives talk about the 3 characteristics, we've talked about 2 of them already. The last one, overwhelmingly, 67% said they're looking to see how we act. Are we solemn? Are we serious? And do we possess gravitas? Now, I thought the best way to go through that was to look at some examples and for us to begin that evaluation now. And on this slide, give yourself 1 point for every time you answer yes. Pencils and paper ready? All right. Do you speak up? If you do, give yourself 1 point. Do you share the conversation equally? Do you ask questions? Do you show up on time? Do you cultivate your network? Do you respond to what was just said? If so, give yourself a yes, a point for that yes. And when I think about this question, I in particular am thinking about whether or not you add value to the conversation or you detract from the conversation. Can you express your vision? Because one of the things as leaders is that if we can't express our vision, the people following us don't know where to go. Do you have an elevator speech? And give yourself 1 point for each elevator speech up to 3. You can have more than that, but I'm only going to give you points for 3 of them. Remember our gentleman in image B. Do you operate effectively under stress? Executives want to know that you can close the deal. And that deal may be a project, or that may be a deal that you're making with a customer or a vendor. Do you have courage? One of the hardest things I learned as I moved into management was that not everybody was going to like every decision I made, but I needed to be comfortable with the decision. And I needed to have courage and stand by that. Can you have a hard conversation? And when I say have a hard conversation, it's kind of like the Toastmasters feedback. We're leaving the person on the other end of that conversation with dignity. Are you composed? Are you respectful? Do people think you are approachable? Are you well read? I often ask my team what book they've read recently. But I also put in a caveat that says, what YouTube training did you take? Or have you watched any executive speeches or interviews, especially as we're developing that executive presence? Are you sincere? Are you authentic? Do you inspire others? And can you read a room? How'd you do? Is it possible at 25 points? And I don't want you to say that out loud, but that gives you an assessment of what you do well and areas where you may need to work. Now, while we're looking for all of those yeses, there's some things that we might do that might distract and say we're not exuding or transmitting executive presence. Let's go through those. And there are 16 points. And I want you to subtract a point for every yes. Do you interrupt people? Do you talk over people? If the only way you can close a deal is to talk over somebody, you're not exuding executive presence. Do you fidget? Or do you doodle during meetings?
Are you monotone? When you're in a conversation, do you respond and change the direction of that conversation? Are you prone to outbursts? Do you ramble? How about your filler words? Do you use filler words? Do you depend on your title? If you have heard yourself saying, I'm the mommy, therefore I said, that's you depending on your title. Do you speak too fast? Or conversely, too slow? How's your posture? Are you slouching? This is one I have to work at. I'm an extreme introvert, and I know that's sometimes hard to believe, but I have to work on maintaining eye contact. Do you worry about imposter syndrome? And imposter syndrome is when we get in our head and we don't give ourselves credit for the successes we've had. We chalk them up to luck. Or there was nobody else available, or nobody else wanted the job, therefore I got it. And that sometimes impacts whether or not we succeed in the role we're in and in future roles. That's a whole nother speech, by the way. Right, Joe? Do you miss deadlines? Because when we go back to that appearance factor, it's not just about how neat that project is if you haven't met the deadline. And do you mumble? And my favorite, are you dramatic? Drama sells TV and reality TV and books, but it doesn't sell us as an executive who should be in charge. How did you do? Are you like me, that there are some areas that we can still work on? If so, let's move into what is the action plans that we need to take to help us identify. The very first, Teresa, did you have a question?
Sorry about that. No, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Well, we do have a time for question and answer afterwards. The first step in developing executive presence is to know yourself and know your brand. What is it that you're good areas or subject matter experts in areas that we're bored with? And in which case, if you're wanting to change that, know where you're wanting your brand to go. So know yourself and know your brand. Be willing to try something new. And that may be hiring an image consultant or taking a media training course so that you know where to stand and how to stand. As we're moved into this whole COVID-19 world and we're doing everything on Zoom, I'm standing today, but I may not have my Zoom frame totally maxed. So a media training course, that's something I'm thinking about. If you're thinking about hiring an image consultant, keep in mind that the image consultant needs to understand what executive presence is, because an image consultant will often steer us to fashion and trendy versus polished and groomed. Be able to articulate your vision. Be able to say where you want to go and what you want to do in one clear, concise topic sentence. Have an elevator speech ready. And how many did I say we need to have ready? We need at least 3. Learn to lead meetings. Thank you, Toastmasters. Yes? The tricky thing is we may be leading and supervising people before we get the opportunity to lead a meeting. But if we haven't figured out how to lead a meeting and how to lead an executive meeting, then we won't move to the next level. Because people will assume that if we can't lead a meeting, we can't lead people. In my current role, I am the facilitator for several meetings, and I need to have an agenda. Thank you, Toastmasters. And I need to start and stop the meeting on time because there are other busy people in this meeting that are dependent on me to stop my meeting on time so that they can go to their next meeting. Learn to lead a meeting. Read, be well read. This helps with articulating your vision. It helps with having that connection between a chief human resource officer and a vice president of sales. Look for role models and observe what they do, but we are not mimicking the role models. We are taking note of what they do, and we're in our own fashion figuring out how we can do and compose. My boss is one of the most composed people you ever want to meet, and I observe her in meetings so that I can learn how to be more composed in a meeting. 8, once again, thank you, Toastmasters. Understand how others view you. But in order to do that, I'm not asking you to ask your best friend. I'm asking you to ask your manager, your boss, or other people that you work with. Identify that trusted advisor and ask for that feedback. And 9 is truly important. Compare the feedback you get to your intentions. Remember, quite often, I said that when we're developing an executive communication style, that may not totally mirror the Toastmaster speaking style. So evaluate that feedback and understand whether or not that feedback is something that you're going to work on, or whether or not that fits into your brand and knowing yourself. All right, what did I say that executives, what's their favorite form of gaining information? What do they do? They ask questions. And what is a question? But it's a way to show credibility. So I'm going to open the floor up. And Joe, do we have some questions?
Yes.
Yes.
The question is, will we receive a copy of this presentation?
Well, you're recording this and it's out on YouTube, correct? Okay. And for everyone that attended, I will forward to Joe a copy of this presentation. But keep in mind that this is my presentation. And it's not meant for, you have to have attended the class. And so it's your bonus for being here.
Any other questions?
When you say you recorded and posted on YouTube, you mean we can search in the front end, or it's inside of some website?
Joe, I think that's your question.
I didn't quite understand the question. Can you repeat it?
Where is the recording will be available?
Oh, it's going to be on our D56 YouTube channel. You could get to that by going to our website and go to YouTube.
Great.
Becky,
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to add that Toastmasters International at the board level is talking about evaluations for leaders, even starting at the club level, a 360 kind of an evaluation. And that will tell you what your executive presence is once that gets implemented.
Absolutely.
But until then, we still do have some pathways projects where a leader can get those 360 evaluations. So anytime that you have an opportunity to get a 360 type of evaluation from someone above your level, at your level, and someone who is more novice than you are, that is a really good way to understand how you are perceived by different people, because the perception is reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the best things for me is that I have a team of young professionals that are learning. It may be their very first job. And in asking them what I do well helps me to high tune where I'm talking with them or how I'm delivering a message to them. And one of the things I got from them very early on was, you ask too many questions. The questions are intimidating. And my response was, I'll work on not asking you so many questions, but you need to get comfortable with me asking you questions because it's a compliment. And so when we worked on that, and I have a tendency to adopt those other communication styles, I may be more initiating. I work with accountants, so goodness knows I'm going to be more analytical at times. I might be more supportive. I don't totally rely on a direct communication style, but that is my preferred method of communication.
Also, if you go outside of your club and you want to be a leader in the district or even outside of the district, there are evaluations that are sent out, assessments that are sent out for you to complete on that leader.
Oh, that's good to know.
And if you want to be that leader, you need to start building relationships and start asking questions about how you're perceived before you go for that position where they're going to be sending out those assessments and questionnaires about, does this person have executive presence? Is this person a leader? Do they have integrity? Are they someone that can resolve conflict? And there's different categories that they're asking questions. And even at the district level, when you're looking to be interviewed for one of the elective positions, there's an assessment, there's an interview process. You need to really practice how you're going to present yourself in that situation if you want to be an elected officer even in the district.
I think that's a very valid point. I've been studying executive presence for 3 years now. It's still something I'm working on. I still have a no question. And any given day of the week, I might have more no's than what I want to. But if we're not aware of where we need to work, we never get any better. Therefore, we need to be asking ourselves those questions. And the interesting thing, I brought up the comment earlier on about somebody with a rocket in their pocket in their career. And quite often, if we don't know that they're exhibiting executive presence, we think, well, they're just lucky because they don't know it. Well, there's something they're doing right, and we need to assess, because until we do, it may be holding us back from those career choices that we need. So I think that's a very valid point. If you're thinking about looking at leadership, then we need to be making those assessments now. It's an excellent point, Pam. Thank you.
Becky, we had a question on how can I prepare different elevator speech to prepare for future situations? How do you train yourself for executive presence?
That's an excellent question. And we could spend a lot of time just on elevator speeches, but here's my approach. All right. One, it goes back to know yourself, know your brand. Well, my brand, I'm an accountant. Therefore, as I was getting on the elevator to go home, I knew where we fit from a revenue and GP number at any given time before I went on the elevator. And I knew where we were to plan. All right. So that if anybody asked me, how's it going? I had that number. That's the easy one. So know your brand. Know where you want to go. Because interestingly enough, what I do well is some of these softer skills. I'm a good trainer. I've been training my whole life. And I'd love to move more into some of those training roles. But how do I do that if all I'm ever seen as is an accountant? Well, then an elevator speech is, I don't know if you're aware, but I joined Toastmasters and I'm working on these skills within Toastmasters. And this might fit into the program this way. So start by knowing your brand first, who you are, what you want to develop, and work from there. Then, who are you meeting on the elevator? Because if you're leaving at a certain time every day, someone may be leaving at the same time with you. So think about who it is that you want to get to know. And maybe that elevator speech is, hello, I'm Becky Noe, and I realize you are Pamela McCowan. Pam, please tell me who you are and what you do, and let them give you an elevator speech so that you can build a basis on for the next elevator speech. Does that make sense?
Yes. And we have one more question for you,
Oh,
Becky.
can I give one more caveat? And I meant to say this, and sometimes I get nervous and I forget. But unless you have developed a relationship with that executive and caught that executive's attention, when they ask you how you are doing, it's not personal. Okay? It's business related. All right, learn from my epic fail. It's a business related elevator speech. Okay? All right. What was the last question, Jeff?
And thank you for sharing those personal situations there. It helps us all learn. Would it be okay to give advice to a peer manager or director who does not exhibit executive presence?
Well, in doing so, the first thing I would ask yourself is, how do you do that respectfully? And if you can't do that respectfully, you need to hold off just a little bit until you can figure out how to do that. Because you don't want that elevator speech to be a career-ending speech. Okay? So learn how to figure out how to do that respectfully. Now, once again, I brought up the image in D because I have had those hard conversations with young ladies about the skirts being too short and blouses being too low. And that's why I added that picture, because it's a very serious conversation that we need to have. And when these young ladies have listened and changed how they come to the meetings, they actually get listened to for what they're saying. Okay. But in doing that, I make sure that I am respectful and courteous and polite to them and leave them with some humility. So one of the things that I always say is, in order to earn a seat and keep a seat at the table, there's some things that I've observed other people do. Or you can't earn a seat at the executive table until you do X, Y, Z. And that varies depending on who you're talking to. If it's your boss, that becomes a little trickier. But I actually had a boss that didn't do agendas. Okay? Heavens to Betsy, they were not a Toastmaster. They didn't do agendas. Okay? And he was talking, and his meetings always ran long. And I said, is it okay if I lead the next meeting? I'm going to organize it. I'm going to put it together. I've been learning some things in Toastmasters and I want to try those out. We started the meeting on time and he was actually late. Okay. But we started on time, and then when he got there, I said, let me fill you in very quickly because there was some vital discussion in the first 5 minutes. Okay. We ended the meeting on time, and we ended with me saying, I know you've got another meeting right behind this. I want to end this on time. He came up to me afterwards and he said, that was the best meeting I've ever attended. Tell me how you did that. So one of the things that I do really well is that I lead by example, and people end up following me and they're not really sure why they're following, or they're not really sure what they're following. Okay. But I set a very high standard, and that would be one way that I would recommend doing that. Letting him see you with that high standard of executive presence, And I've had people come to me in various spots saying, well, how did you do that? I'm known for being the closer. I can close a deal. And when I talk about closing a deal, I tell people professionally, their baby's ugly. Okay? And people will come up to me afterwards and go, you know, I didn't realize I wasn't doing my job very well until you pointed it out. That's when you can do that and have that discussion with a great deal of class. That's a whole nother speech. Maybe Joe and I'll talk about having that in OLE, because I think that's something that we could all learn how to do. But you learn and you build that skill set, but you start by making sure that you're setting that example. Did that answer your question? All right, Joe?
Thank you, Becky, so much for your time tonight and this great presentation. It was very useful, a lot of great comments in chat. They really would like a copy of your presentation. If you give me permission, I'll send it to those in attendance, as well as the link to the YouTube video once it's uploaded.
Perfect. Been my pleasure. Thank you very much, guys.
Any last parting advice?
Try this, try pieces at a time, and let it fit to you, because if it's not sincere and not authentic to you, it won't work.
Practice the table topics.
Practice table topics. You got it. Thank you very much, guys. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Becky.
Good job.
Thank you.